Yes. Yes, sir. We can start.
Namaste everyone. So welcome to day 4 of this FTP. In yesterday's session, we saw the reports of 4 British officers, that is William Adam, Prendergast, Thomas Munro, and G.W. Leitner. And we saw their surveys of indigenous education, which they did in Bengal, Bihar, Madras, and Punjab provinces. We also saw this Austrian missionary Bartholomew's report on the education of children in India. And yesterday, due to paucity of time, we could not complete Dharampalji's analysis of these reports. So this is the thread from where we will pick up today. There are just about 3 slides which I could not cover yesterday. We will complete this analysis, insights from Dharampalji. Then we will go to today's topic, which is the educational legacy of Bharata from the pre-British times. So Dharampalji, analyzing these reports, he says, it is important to emphasize that indigenous education was carried out through pathashalas, madrasas, and gurukulas. So he says these were the institutions through which this elementary, primary education was happening in India, whose extensive network we saw yesterday, its wide reach, its affordability, its efficiency, its efficacy, etc., is what we were looking at based on the data provided by these British officers. Education in these traditional institutions, which were kept alive by revenue contributions by the community, including illiterate peasants. So this also we saw that these schools were what you call today as crowdsourcing, right? You go to Twitter or you go to some social media and you put up a cause saying some old person needs financial help, and then all philanthropists who are on the social media begin to donate, right? So this is how, in fact, these schools, the village schools, were a community enterprise, were a community affair, and the entire community would chip in by providing funding, including, Dharampalji says, even illiterate peasants, because they wanted to ensure that their children got education, even if they were illiterate, and therefore they would send them to these village schools, and therefore they would give a part of their agricultural produce to these village schools. And he says the term used for this was called shiksha. And he says this term shiksha is very different from the English word school or schooling that we use. He says shiksha consists of 3 pillars. One is prajna, the second is shila, the third is samadhi. So prajna is cognitive development. This is cognitive skills training that happens as part of the teaching learning process. Shila is the character development, the personality development of the student that happens. Samadhi is the higher goals of life, which is dharma and moksha, I think is being referred to in that term called samadhi. So these institutions were, in fact, the watering holes of the culture of traditional communities. Therefore, the term school is a weak translation of the roles these institutions really played in Indian society. So he says, when we simply look at it as schooling and we are looking at it from that colonial point of view, we are actually not understanding the full role or impact of these educational institutions. They went beyond reading, writing, arithmetic. They were actually shaping the personality and the character and the values of our society. Our civilizational values were being preserved and passed on to the next generation through these pathashalas, gurukulas, madrasas, etc. Then he says, the most well-known and controversial point which emerged from the educational surveys lies in an observation made by William Adam. In his first report, he observed that there exist about 1 lakh village schools in Bengal and Bihar around the 1830s. So we discussed this yesterday, and I was saying that this is not a precise figure that he is giving based on the number of schools that he actually, counted physically, but going by previous estimates of previous British officers, he arrives at an estimate of 1 lakh village schools in Bengal and Bihar. So Dharampalji says this statement appears to have been founded on the impressions of various high British officials and others who had known the different areas rather intimately and over long periods. It had no known backing of official records. So Dharampalji is clarifying that this 1 lakh is not to be taken merely at face value, that it is an estimate that was made based on the experience of these British officers. And I was telling you that, it is not a very improbable figure, because given the number of villages in India, and given the British reports from across India, which were saying that almost every village had a school, most of the village had a village school, Arriving at that number would not be very difficult actually. So it is not an an exaggerated number, so to say, but it is also not an accurate number. It is not a precise number. Similar statements had been made much before William Adel. For areas of the Madras presidency, men like Thomas Munro had observed that every village had a school. For the areas of the newly extended presidency of Bombay around 1820, senior officials like Prendergast noted that there is hardly a village, great or small, throughout our territories in which there is not at least one school, and in larger villages more. Observations made by Leitner in 1882 show that the spread of education in the Punjab around 1850 was of similar extent. So all these reports, in fact, we covered in great detail yesterday. Continuing, Dharampalji says, the idea of a school existing in every village, dramatic and picturesque in itself, attracted great notice and eclipsed the equally important details. So Dharampalji is saying these, the publication of these reports, especially in his beautiful tree, people caught, what drew people's attention was the number. There's 1 lakh schools. Oh, there were 1 lakh schools, and there was all this debate. There were some section of scholars saying this is an exaggerated figure. This cannot be. Then others were trying to justify it. And he says in all this debate, many other important details were kind of, sidelined or completely overlooked. The more detailed and hard facts have received hardly any notice or analysis. This is both natural and unfortunate, for these latter facts provide an insight into the nature of Indian society at that time. So as I was saying, the deeper role which these, patashalas, etc. played is what Dharampalji is trying to point out. Deeper analysis of this data and adequate reflection on the results followed by required further research may help solve even the riddle of what has been termed the legend of the 1 lakh schools. So this is where Dharampalji is saying that further research has to be done. So this is the research potential of the beautiful tree, that all of us, in fact, have a responsibility to own up that this research has to be, this study has to be continued. For example, whichever town or city that you are in, let's say you are in Toothukudi, you are in Madras, or you're in Pune, you're in some other place in India, can you, suppose you're interested in doing this kind of research, can you access some of these documents of the British times? Can you find out what were the number of schools in your own district where you were born? Right? And what do the British documents of that time? Were surveys like this done? And what is the picture that emerges from these surveys? So, there is so much work to be done, given that there are about 6 lakh villages in India. The documents for all these villages are yet to be published, right? There are many such documents which are yet to see the light of day. So imagine the potential, right? Imagine a huge amount of research gap or potential that exists here, that we can produce 100 PhDs who could, go to different districts of this vast land, dig into these archives, do their own research. We don't have to agree with what Dharampal says. We can do our own independent research, bring out the data, study it, analyze it, and publish it. Then Dharampalji says, school attendance, especially in the districts of the Madras presidency, even in the decade state of the period 1822 to 25, was proportionately far higher than the numbers in all variety of schools in England in 1800. So this comparison also was kind of overlooked, he says, and he's pointing out that we need to take note that the attendance, the participation was higher than in England in 1800. The conditions under which teaching took place in the Indian schools were less dingy, more natural. And it was observed the teachers in the Indian schools were generally more dedicated and sober than in the English version. So he says the Indian schools were more natural. We were discussing yesterday that a local temple would become the location for conducting the classes every day. Sitting under a banyan tree, the classes would go on. In a teacher's house, the classes would go on. Or in a Gurukula, Patashala, these local ashrams, these classes would go on. So he says the setting was more natural and the teachers were far more sober than in their English counterparts. The only aspect, and certainly a very important one, where Indian institutional education seems to have lagged behind was with regard to the education of girls. Right? So Dharampalji is openly acknowledging that when you see the boys to girls ratio in these village schools, the number of girls is very, very less. So this also we discussed. We saw that it's mostly boys who would be sent to these village schools. But remember that the clarification has also been given that girls were getting home education and that a whole parallel educational system was running through such home schooling that was happening. For many boys who would not come to those village schools, they would get educated at home. and a large percentage of girls were getting educated at home. In fact, that is what he is pointing out. Quite possibly, girls' schooling may have been proportionately more extensive in England in 1800, and was definitely the case. A few decades later, the absence of girls in schools was explained, however, by the fact that most of their education took place in the home. So he says, if you compare this to maybe schools in England, you would find more proportion of girls going to the schools there, but this does not in itself mean that girls were not educated or that they were denied education. Then the last part of the analysis. See, what I'm showing you is only extracts of Dharampalji's analysis. The important parts is what I have extracted. This does not mean that this is the full part of his analysis. It is, however, the Madras Presidency and Bengal Bihar data which presents a kind of revelation. That data reveals the background of the teachers and the taught. So remember the tables that we saw yesterday, caste-wise composition, community-wise profiling of the students, community-wise profiling of the teachers, especially from William Adam, Bengal Bihar reports that we saw, the last third report where he is showing the community profiles. It presents a picture which is in sharp contrast to the various scholarly pronouncements of the past 100 years or more, in which it had been assumed that education of any sort in India till very recent decades was mostly limited to the twice born, that is Brahmins, Dvija as they are called, amongst the Hindus, and amongst the Muslims to those from the ruling elite. So Dharampali is saying that this assumption that education was confined only to the Brahmins amongst the Hindus and to the elite amongst the Muslims was a complete error, right? Because these reports are clearly showing the social reach, the complete wide social reach of these schools. We saw that nearly 70% of the students were from all communities were represented. These were from the non-Brahmin communities. In fact, we saw that the Brahmins were in a minority in many of these village schools. The actual situation which is revealed was different, if not quite contrary, for at least amongst the Hindus in the districts of the Madras Presidency, and dramatically so in the Tamil-speaking areas, as well as the two districts of Bihar. It was the groups termed Shudras and the castes considered below them who predominated in the thousands of the then still existing schools in practically each of these areas. In fact, if you remember in yesterday's table, I also showed you that amongst the teachers, the table was pointing out that there were teachers from the community called Chandals, who were leather workers. They would work with leather of dead animals, hides they would work with. And therefore, traditionally, they were considered as kind of, we were told that they were considered impure, untouchable, etc. But William Adam is saying that even amongst them, that amongst these village schools, there were teachers from that Chandal community, etc. That is why Dharampal is saying that what the reports are revealing are quite contrary to what we have been made to believe through colonial historiography, that it is the Shudras and the castes even below them who predominated in the thousands of the then existing schools in practically each of these areas. So this is the most important crux of it. Imagine the amount of distorted history that we have been taught year after year, decade after decade, century after century through colonial historiography, how deep these false notions have been embedded into our minds. There are whole political parties which have built their careers and futures on the basis of these lies which we have been fed. And it has become such a politicized and sensitive issue that it is difficult to, in fact, even discuss these issues openly in society today. This is the impact, that this colonial historiography has had on us, that people are not even willing to examine the data, right? They come and say that for thousands of years, there was discrimination. But when we ask them for data, please produce evidence for this, not one of them will be able to produce any hard data like William Adam has done, like Prendergast has done, like Thomas Munro has done. Without data, we will be building castles in the air and making sweeping generalizations and comments about the state of education in India. The last issue concerns the conditions and arrangements which alone could have made such a vast system of education feasible. The sophisticated operative fiscal arrangements of the pre-British Indian polity. So Dharampalji is saying, please pay attention to how these schools were run, how these schools were managed, especially their financial support. Unless there was an ecosystem which was supporting these thousands and lakhs of schools, such schools would not have been possible. So, understand how society, this gives us great insight into how Indian society used to function, how it had valued education, and how as a community they were taking the initiative to ensure to run these schools. It was not some central government, some state government, some king sitting there who was paying the salaries of these teachers or funding these schools. It was society which was funding these schools. Through these fiscal measures, substantial proportions of revenue had long been assigned for the performance of a multiplicity of public purposes. These seem to have stayed more or less intact through all the previous political turmoils and made such education possible. Remember what Leitner said about Punjab province yesterday in the report that we saw. He says Punjab has been torn by war and invasion for almost 1,000 years, and yet it has not given up on its commitment to education. That was Leitner's report. This is exactly what, again, Dharampal is pointing out, that throughout all the political turmoils that India has witnessed during the ages since, especially in the last 1,000 years when foreign invasions began into India, these social institutions which were protecting education, etc., were not disturbed by the political disturbance that existed. The collapse of this arrangement through a total centralization of revenue as well as politics led to decay in the economy. So Dharampalji is saying that centralization worked against us, and in fact centralization continues to work against us. Right? Most of the funds that are allocated to village schools even today are swindled by civil servants, by IS officers, and all these people. Not even Rajiv Gandhi would say that out of 1 rupee given to the rural areas, only 15 paisa reaches them. 85 paisa is looted in corruption, right? And today, even today, we continue to be extremely corrupt. This whole bureaucracy, Soviet-style bureaucracy that we set up post-independence and under the influence of the colonial administration, continues to have this centralized approach controlling the whole of India. Sitting in Delhi, I can pass laws for everybody. Sitting in Delhi, I will pass rules for everybody. This is not how Indian society functioned. They were extremely decentralized. They allowed local bodies, panchayats, village councils, the local people to take charge of their own social educational life. And this is how these institutions were protected because they were not centralized. Even if foreign invaders would come and say occupy Delhi or occupy areas of political power, the grassroots social institutions would not be disturbed, and these institutions would continue to serve the common people and their interests, their welfare through institutions like these village schools. This inference, if at all valid, warrants a re-examination of the previous various currently held intellectual and political assumptions with regard to the nature of pre-British Indian society and its political and state structure. So he says, this should force us to also reevaluate the way we have studied ancient India, the pre-British Indian society. We have been told that India was all divided into warring kingdoms and the kings were all fighting. These kings were all tyrants and they did not look after the people. And therefore, foreign invasions happened because we were fighting amongst ourselves. This entire narrative which we have learned in our schools, most of these assumptions which we have made in our schools has to be re-evaluated, right? So this is the gist of Dharampal's analysis. So with this, we come to the end of day 3, which is the British reports. We will quickly, without wasting time, go to the day 4, which is pre-British India. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, I'll just load the PPT and then.
Sir, Sangeeta ji had a question that she wanted to ask
Yes.
yesterday. Sangeeta ji, are you there with us?
Yes, and thank you so much. Namaste, everyone. So, namaste. I mean, I was actually listening and very curious that the narrative and the narrations that you were telling is about the the Britishers actually, right? But we have this pre-Britishers era also, and much prior to that, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years and 4,000, right? Something like that, right? And 5,000 even, right? So, that type of education system was, how do we know that that lineage is actually happening when you are giving that, right? It could be that in between it might have been distorted, right? I mean, some bit of it, maybe generations, right? They might have been distorted to what we have been seeing from Dharampalji's work. So just, very curious, and just forgive me for this very...
If I get your question right, you are asking whether the same kind of picture would have been there in the pre-British times.
Pre-British is, just a small part, but, prior to that, we were actually being, Islamic and all invaders, right? I mean, they have actually done, and then there were other distortions that were taken place, right? I mean,
So that is what we will cover in this
Okay.
today's session.
Acha, okay. So if you're covering that in
That is the reason. I knew that this question would come up. That is why
Okay.
I had made one module on this, so that you see the continuity of this whole system, right?
Okay.
What was there in the pre-British period, what happened during the pre-British period, and the post-independence period. So that is why yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the past, present, and the future, the whole panoramic vision is what we will try to get.
Sure, sir. Sure. Okay,
Right.
okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nidhi.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to the next module. So this is a map of India. Are you able to see the map, Nidhi, which I'm sharing on the screen?
Yes, sir. We are able to see, sir. Yes.
So this is a
We
map
can go ahead,
of
sir.
right. Can somebody tell me what are these places marked on the map? You can post it in the chat box if you want, or
Pramod sir, I cannot see the map.
Okay. Is everybody
I can
having the
see
same
you,
problem?
but not the map.
The map is visible, absolutely visible. I think there could be a problem with.
Can others confirm, please, that you're able to see the map?
Yeah. Can you please put your emoticons to say that it's seen? Yeah.
Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the.
Yes, sir. It is visible to us.
Okay. So can somebody tell me what are these places shown on the map? Anyone?
Participants, you can unmute yourself and you can respond, or you can also put your responses in the chat box and we will read out for you.
So
Read out for sure.
perhaps the world famous universities places or
Yes.
mathas.
These are all the ancient Indian universities that existed all across India. So, not just during the British period, we will see that these centers of learning have been there for many millennia, right? So, number one is Takshashila, we will see. Then two is Vallabhi, three is Kashi, four is Nalanda, five is Udantapuri, six is Vikramashila, seventh is Somapura, ninth is Pushpagiri, 10 is Nagarjuna Konda, that is in Andhra Pradesh, 11 is Kanchipuram in Tamil Nadu. Takshashila is in today's Pakistan, Vallabhi is in Gujarat, Kashi we know Uttar Pradesh, Nalanda, Vikramashila, Udantapura, these are all in the Bengal, Bihar. Somapura is in Bangladesh, right? Jagatala, I think, is again Bangladesh, Bengal region. Pushpagiri, possibly Orissa, I think, if I'm right. Nagarjuna Konda is Andhra Pradesh, Kanchipuram is Tamil Nadu, right? So let's look at what these centers of learning were and what kind of learning was available in these centers. So two of the most prominent were Takshashila and Nalanda. We know about them because archaeologically the remains have been excavated of some of these places. We don't have documents as precise as we have, for example, from these British officers' reports in the case of 18th century India. So the further we go into the past, the more sketchy it becomes, the more mystery it becomes. But we do have some very striking details available through foreign travelers' accounts. Through archaeology, we have been able to glean certain details. Through ancient manuscripts, we have certain details of all these references to these ancient centers of learning. So Takshashila was a Hindu-Buddhist center that dates back to 5th or the 6th century of the before the Common Era. According to legend, this city was founded by Taksha, an ancient king who ruled over a realm called Takshakhanda, possibly linked to modern-day Tashkent. So this word Tashkent, for example, the speculation is that it comes from this word called Taksha. Just as, for example, you have this place called Gandhar, which becomes Kandahar. The Kandahar airport was where the IC-814 hijacking unfolded. So many of us don't realize that this was the birthplace of Shakuni and Gandhari, these characters in the Mahabharata, this kingdom of what was called Gandhara. So many of these places which are prominently described, especially in the Mahabharata, Ramayana, etc., you will see, especially in the Mahabharata, Gandhara, etc., you will see that they are in today's Pakistan, right? Many of these places are in Afghanistan or in Pakistan today. So Takshashila is in Pakistan. The Sanskrit name Takshashila combines Taksha, referring to the king Taksha, son of Bharata, Mandavi from the Ramayana. So we know that Rama, Lakshmana, Bharata, and Shatrughna. So Bharata is married to Sita's sister Mandavi. So their, I think, son is called Taksha. And there was possibly some statue erected in his memory, which is called the Shila. And this is how that university is called Takshashila. Takshashila features prominently in later Jataka tales. If you know Jataka tales are the Buddhist tales of the previous incarnations of the Buddha. So after the Buddha attained enlightenment, whenever he would travel in India along with his disciples, at certain places, suddenly he would remember, legend says, his previous incarnations when he was born in animal bodies, etc. And he will narrate these stories to his disciples, saying that in a previous birth I was born as this monkey, or sometimes as an elephant. So these disciples have recorded these narrations of Buddha of his previous incarnations. About 500 such stories have been compiled together as what are called these Jataka tales. So in these Jataka tales, this place called Takshashila features prominently around the 5th century of the Common Era. One such tale, this is in Pali, right? The Takshashila Jataka. So it must be Takshashila Jataka, which becomes Takshashila Jataka in Pali. Also known as the Telapatta Jataka, recounts how a prince from Banaras was promised kingship in Takshashila if he could reach the city within 7 days, braving a perilous journey through forests guarded by yakshinis, magical beings, etc. So there is a fairy tale that is being told that a young man has been promised the kingdom of Takshashila. He will become the king if he can reach there within 7 days, etc. So you find even through such oral histories, through such legends, through such stories which have been told, references to Takshashila are found. But the most famous reference to Takshashila is that, of course, of Vishnugupta Chanakya, also called as Kautilya. Right? We all know that Vishnugupta Chanakya, his father was a teacher called Chanaka, who was born in Pataliputra, which is today's Patna, Bihar. And Pataliputra was being ruled by the Nanda dynasty, the Navanandas as they are called. Mahapadmananda was ruling over Pataliputra when Chanaka was the teacher. Then Mahapadmananda's son Dhanananda takes over as the king, and Dhanananda was known to be a corrupt king. And Chanaka, this teacher, gets into the wrong books of the king, and he is imprisoned. And legend says, so this whole story we come to know from a Sanskrit play which is called the Mudra Rakshasa, which talks about Chanakya and Dhanananda and the story of what happens, right? So when his father is arrested and he dies in prison, it is said that this young Chanakya, he is the son of Chanaka, therefore he is called Chanakya. The name given by his parents is Vishnugupta, and therefore he is called Vishnugupta Chanakya. And he was known for his statecraft and his strategy, so therefore he was called Kutila, and therefore Kautilya. And his magnum opus is this Arthashastra. So when his father passes away, they say that this young Chanakya, Vishnugupta, goes away to Takshashila from Pataliputra. He travels all the way to Takshashila and he becomes a student of the Takshashila University. He grows up there, he completes his education there, and then he becomes a teacher at the Takshashila University. He becomes a professor of economics, governance, administration, statecraft at Takshashila University. And then he comes into contact with this young boy called Chandragupta Maurya, whom he will take to Takshashila, and he will groom him into the future emperor. This is how the foundation of the Mauryan Empire was laid in India. So Chandragupta Maurya, Vishnugupta Chanakya, as well as Charaka of Charaka Samhita. So if you ask any Ayurvedic Vaidya today, they will tell you that there are two texts which are very, very important in Ayurveda. One is called Charaka Samhita, the other is called Sushruta Samhita. So this great physician, Ayurvedic doctor called Charaka is also said to have studied at Takshashila University. Students typically began their education at Takshashila around the age of 16. So it's very similar to today, right? You finish your +2 somewhere around the age of 15 or 16, and then you will go to university. Right? You will clear an entrance exam and go to the university. So similar thing is being described, that they would enter the university around the age of 16. The curriculum was vast and varied, encompassing the Vedas and the 18 arts, a diverse set of disciplines. Actually, there are totally 64 arts that are described, of which I think 18 are prominent. So those 18 arts are being described here. A diverse set of disciplines that include archery, hunting, science of elephants, domesticating or turning them into war elephants, etc. The university was also known for its law school, medical school, Institute of Military Science, reflecting the intellectual richness of the time. So I was mentioning yesterday that both Takshashila and Nalanda, these two universities are said to have attracted a lot of foreign talent. Many foreign students would come and study here, both at Takshashila and Nalanda. Why? Because there were great famous teachers like Chanakya teaching there, and this is what attracted foreign students to them. Nalanda, for example, we will see that the Buddha himself will be teaching, visiting these sites. And later on, the founder of Jainism, Mahavira himself, will teach at Nalanda University. So imagine, a university where both Buddha and Mahavira have taught, that is the reputation of the university. And therefore, scholars from all over the world, those who wanted to learn Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, these were the places to where they would come to learn Buddhist and other philosophies, right? So this is why they attracted so many foreign students. So this is the photograph of the archaeological remains of Nalanda Mahavihara, as it is called, and that is how Bihar gets its name. Bihar comes from the word Vihara. So in Buddhist parlance, Vihara means a monastery, right? So Mahavihara, great monastery. So Nalanda Mahavihara. So the dating is 427 to 1197 of the Common Era. This is the period when this university was supposed to have been most active, was known to have been functioning. So Buddhist studies, fine arts, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, politics, martial arts were taught at the university. The center had 8 separate compounds, 10 temples, meditation halls, classrooms, lakes, and parks. So hundreds, thousands of Buddhist monks would be teaching at Nalanda. So there would be quarters for them, there would be meditation halls for them, there would be classrooms, there would be parks. 9-story a library where monks meticulously copied books and documents so that individual scholars could have their own collections. So, these monks would sit in the library and copy those Buddhist manuscripts, for example, the teachings of the Buddha. There were many of these sutras, for example, that would be taught. And each of these documents, they would make copies of it manually so that the students or the scholars who wanted to have their own personal collection would have such collections. And we'll see that once a Chinese traveler called Huan Sang, right, comes all the way from China, traveling thousands of kilometers over many years, almost I think 4.5 to 5 years, he will travel only to come to take admission at Nalanda University, and he will carry almost a camel load of these manuscripts, Buddhist manuscripts. He will go back to China, and it is because of Huan Sang, who's left behind very systematic travelogues, accounts of his travels in India, of his time at Nalanda, and he's gone back and spread these documents in China, and these have been preserved in China, that we come to know so much about Nalanda University and the kind of center of learning that it was during its peak time. So there were dormitories for students, housing about 10,000 students in the university's heyday, and providing accommodations for about 2,000 professors. So imagine the scale of the university, right? If many of your faculty members, how many students are there in your college, right? How many professors are there? So with that, please make a comparison. If there are 10,000 students studying in a single campus, and there are 2,000 professors there teaching. So the university where I am, there are 8,000 students, which is comparable, and there are about just 500 professors, right? So this Nalanda is bigger than that. There are 2,000 professors there. So see the ratio also of the professors, teachers to students there. Nalanda University attracted pupils and scholars from Korea, Japan, China, Tibet, Indonesia, Persia, and Turkey. So these were world famous universities, perhaps what Oxford is today, Cambridge is today, what MIT and Harvard are today to Indian students, right? See how the degradation has happened, how the reversal of roles has happened. Those days, foreigners were coming here to study, and today we are going in droves. We are talking about brain drain, we're talking about immigration, right? As students think that it will be the peak of their career to go and join MIT, Harvard, etc., because the standards of our education have fallen. Why it has fallen, we will see in tomorrow's session. So Nalanda Mahavihara was, its main importance comes from its Buddhist roots as a center of learning, right? We also know that, the descendant of Chandragupta Maurya was this emperor called Ashoka, who, invested a lot of time and money and his resources into the spread of Buddhism worldwide. He gave funding to Buddhist monks to travel across the world to popularize Buddhism. And that is how Buddhism went to China, to Sri Lanka, to all these foreign countries. And as the as Buddhism became more popular, right, more and more students would come to Nalanda, etc., to study Buddhist philosophy. So Buddha often came here with 2 of his chief disciples, Sariputra and Moggallana. So this is, I was telling you, right? Imagine the Buddha himself coming and teaching at Nalanda University, right? So today it's something like, suppose Einstein comes and teaches you the theory of relativity in your university, right? Or say Srinivas Ramanujan is coming and teaching you mathematics, or say Newton comes and teaches you mechanics, right? It's something like that. You're learning Buddhist philosophy right from the founder of Buddhism himself, and you're learning Jain philosophy from the founder of Jainism himself, right? Jainism itself. And this is why these universities were so sought after. They were so world famous for all these foreign students. So the large stupa is known as Sariputra Stupa, marking the spot where he was supposedly born. So there is a stupa there in Nalanda University where this one of the disciples of Buddha is supposed to have been born, called Sariputra. So it is called Sariputra Stupa. One of the cells belonged to Naropa, who was instrumental in bringing Buddhism to Tibet, along with such Nalanda luminaries as Shantirakshita and Padmasambhava. So if you know the history of Tibet, you will know that these two monks, Shantirakshita, Padmasambhava, carry Buddhism to Tibet. That is how Tibet became a center of Buddhism. Dalai Lama, etc. Today they are in exile, as you know. After the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1950, they were forced to leave Tibet and come and settle in India. They've settled in Dharmashala today. But this is how Tibet, became a center of Buddhism. And we'll see why many of these Buddhist monks, in fact, go away to Tibet. Why Nalanda falls in the next slide. So this Naropa. Anybody knows the story of Naropa? Anybody in the audience who can tell me the Naropa was the guru of which famous Tibetan yogi? If you can tell me the name, if you know the name, please post it in the chat box. So there was a very famous Tibetan yogi called Milarepa, right? So if you read the story, please go and read the story of Milarepa. If you, Nidhi ji is saying that our university has 50,000 students. Oh my God. So that's nice to know. So you have exceeded Nalanda in capacity. That's nice. So one of the cells belonged to Naropa. So this was Milarepa's guru, who was instrumental in bringing Buddhism to Tibet, right, along with the other luminaries. So what happened to such universities, right? What happened to Nalanda? So this is Huan Sang's account. Huan Sang, the famous pilgrim from China, came here and studied and taught for 5 years in the 7th century of the Common Era. So today we don't use BC and AD, we use CE and BCE. So I've the book from where I've extracted it is using AD. So I just, because it is in the original, so I've left it like that. So this is from Paul Monroe's Encyclopedia of History of Education, Volume 1, as quoted in, this paper article on My India, My Glory, where, he's saying, Huan Sang, or I Sing as he is saying, stayed for his studies at Nalanda for the long period of 10 years, from 675 to 685 of the Common Era, during which he collected some 400 Sanskrit texts amounting to 500,000 shlokas. 5 lakh shlokas he wrote down manually, made copies of these texts. This shows that Nalanda possessed a well-equipped library. So we saw in the previous slide that it was a 9-storied library. Information on the Nalanda University Library is given in the Tibetan accounts, from which we know that the library is situated in a special area known by the poetical name of Dharmaganja. So Dharmaganja means mart of religion, market of religion. It is the meeting place of the religion, right? Comprised 3 huge buildings called Ratnagara, Ratnodadi and Ratnaranjala, of which Ratnasagara, which was a 9-storied building, specialized in the collection of rare sacred works like Prajna Paramita Sutra and tantric books like Samajaguhya and the like. So these are all very technical Buddhist texts, teachings that were preserved in this 9-story library. And this is what drew people like Huan Sang himself was a Buddhist monk, and therefore he comes all the way to learn Buddhism from the very origin of Buddhism, from the very center of Buddhism itself. So these are the accounts of Huan Sang and how he gains admission at Nalanda. So Huan Sang says the demanding entrance examination at Nalanda were overseen by Dwaracharyas. Dwara means gate. Acharya, the teacher who is standing at the gate, the teacher who is protecting the gate of Nalanda. Learned scholars, so the senior most professors of Nalanda would be guarding the gates of Nalanda, and it is at these gates that these entrance exams would be conducted almost every day. New students who wanted to gain admission, they had to clear this entrance exam put by these Dwaracharyas. They will ask questions orally, they had to answer orally. Only if they were satisfied that the student had enough proficiency, he had that eligibility, only then he would be admitted into Nalanda University. Supported by various gatekeepers and ultimately conducted by a dedicated board of teachers assigned specifically to admissions. Only about 20 to 30% of the applicants pass this evaluation. So just imagine, what they're telling us about the university is very similar to how we get into a university today, right? We write an entrance exam, a percentage of people, and see the difficulty of the entrance exam. only 20 to 30%. So if 100 students would come, only 20 would be admitted. So difficult used to be the entrance exam. In fact, we are told, somewhere I had read, I don't know if it has a historical source, that Yuan Sang comes almost 6 months or 1 year ahead of his admission time, and then he undergoes coaching in in the areas near Patliputra and Nalanda. So there were coaching centers which were training students to clear this entrance exam of Nalanda. So this is all mind-boggling to even think about. None of this we are told, nothing of this will be mentioned in our history textbooks, in the popular literature, in the colonial historiography that we have read. So then the Chinese philosopher and traveler, that is Yuan Sang, noted that aspiring students had to complete a series of rigorous tasks before being admitted. They were expected to be well versed in both Hindu and Buddhist philosophical and religious texts. The university emphasized debates, discussions, tutorials as core teaching methods. Final assessments were uniquely structured. Students were required to engage in intellectual debates with gatekeepers, and their performance was evaluated based on the examiner's level of satisfaction rather than standardized grading. So the whole system is being described, how mind-boggling it is. So the teaching process, learning process involved debates, discussions, and they would be given tutorials. And then the final assessments would be in the form of debates, shastrarthas, these were called, vada, samvada, etc. With other scholars, they had to debate these ideas. And only when their senior professors were satisfied that these people had gained proficiency, only then they would graduate from the university. Now we come to the famous destruction of the Nalanda University, which is again a sad chapter of our history, dark period of our history, how systematically it was brought down and destroyed. So this picture and the quote that follows is from Wikiquote, where it talks about the end of the Buddhist monks, AD 1193, from Hutchinson's Story of the Nations depicts Khilji. This is Bhaktiar Khilji, who comes, I think, in the 11th century of the Common Era, invading into these regions. So, Bhaktiar Khilji's invasion is particularly nasty, very, very painful, because all this cluster of universities which existed near Nalanda, including Odantapuri and Vikramashila, were completely destroyed by him and his hordes of invaders. So he is in this picture. You see him sitting on the horse, and he is examining the manuscripts that were stored in the library at Nalanda. And then you can see that all dead bodies are lying around. He has killed all the Buddhist monks, and he is unable to make sense of those manuscripts. Great quantities of plunder were obtained, and the slaughter of the shaven-headed Brahmins. So he's referring to the Buddhist monks as Brahmins, because that is how they looked at it. But there were both Hindu monks, Buddhist monks were there. It was not just Brahmin teachers who were there. That is to say, the Buddhist monks were so thoroughly completed that when the victor sought for someone capable of explaining the contents of the books in the libraries of the monasteries, not a living man could be found who was able to read them. See the sad state that he had killed all the Buddhist monks. This is what the account says. And then when he asked somebody to explain what was there in the manuscripts, nobody was left who could explain the manuscripts. Nobody was capable of explaining it. And then the story goes that he burns it down, right? So Nalanda University is said to have had about 4 million manuscripts, that is about 40 lakh manuscripts. If the population of India around that time, Yaska says in his commentary on the Veda, that the population of India somewhere around the 9th century of the Common Era was about 33 crores. So if the population was around 33 crores and a university had 40 lakh manuscripts, please try and make an estimate of the kind of literacy and education that would have existed in Indian society for one university to have 40 lakh manuscripts, right? How many books does your university's library have in comparison? Please look at it, right? So this was one of the biggest libraries of its time in India, which was systematically burned down. It was in the 1860s that the archaeologist Alexander Cunningham identified the site as the Nalanda University, and in 1915-1916, the Archaeological Survey of India began excavations of the site. So how do we know that it was burned down? You find, in the previous picture, if you see, you find a lot of the black soot which you see is indicative of fire. So there are all these layers of soot that have been found, and it has been carbon dated around to the same date of Bhaktiar Khilji's invasion. So this is how historians connect the dots. They see the destruction that has happened in all these universities in that area, and they correlate it, connect it to Bhaktiar Khilji's invasion. So it is an established fact. There are some scholars, historians in India, who claim that Bhaktiar Khilji did not destroy Nalanda, Vikramapuri, Udantapuri, etc. That this was some accidental fire which happened and burned down the university, which is not true. There are archaeologists who have done this study and they have correlated it, so it matches the descriptions given that Bhaktiar Khilji was responsible for the destruction of these sites. So this was possibly one of the most destructive, disruptive, devastating kind of events to happen in our history, because the kind of loss of heritage, the kind of loss of knowledge that happened was humongous. It cannot be estimated. There are scholars who say that what we know as 4 Vedas today, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, Atharva Veda, was only 1% of the original texts which were called the Vedas. Some of that was also preserved in the Nalanda University and it was completely burned down. So those texts are not available today at all. They are not accessible at all, right? So this is, the destruction that has happened because of Bhaktiar Khilji's invasions. So we were talking about how Tibet became, center of Buddhism. This is the reason why many of the Buddhist monks who could save their lives, it is said that they ran away to Tibet because Tibet was in the Himalayas, and Bhaktiar Khilji's cavalry is mainly it was horse-driven army. They could not easily climb these mountains and reach remote areas like the Himalayas. So therefore, the Himalayas in Tibet became a kind of refuge, a center for protection for them from these invasions which were happening in the plains in India. So this is a photograph of Udantapuri, Bihar, 8th to 9th century CE, again destroyed by Bhaktiar Khilji. So you'll find all these ruins where you go in those areas. So this is in Bangladesh. This is called the Somapura Mahavihara, or Pahad Buddhist Vihara as it is called. So see the extent and the beauty of these ruins which are there. This is Nagarjunakonda in Andhra Pradesh, where again this was a Buddhist center of learning. There was a great Buddhist teacher. You can see the statue of Buddha on the left. So there was a great Buddhist scholar called Nagarjuna was there, who taught Buddhism here, and it is after him, right, that it is called Nagarjuna Konda. Konda in Telugu means mountain or hill, right? So this is how it gets the name of Nagarjuna Konda. So this is a place. Can somebody tell me where is this place? This is called the Nalanda of South India. I think the name is given, so no point in asking. This is in Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. So this was again a very important center of learning. Kandalur Shala, this was called, a very important university that existed for IKS studies centers where mathematics, astronomy, all traditional sciences were taught at Kandalur Shala. Right? This is Sharada Pit in Kashmir. Namaste Sharade Devi Kashmira Puravasini. This is the shloka of Saraswati, that she is the very center of learning. The most important center of learning in India was Kashmir. Look at the state of Kashmir today. If you think of Kashmir, what comes to your mind is terrorism, insurgency, and all for the negative news, for all the unwanted reasons, Kashmir is in the news. But you will not believe that Kashmir was the fountainhead of many of the intellectual schools of thought in India, including certain schools of Shaivism and aesthetics, etc. Right, Abhinava Gupta and all these great scholars come from this area of Kashmir. So it was called Sharada Pitha, right? This university, and there is a facsimile of a manuscript of Panini's grammar which was taught at Sharada Pitha, which has survived to this day. Right, so this is an example of some of these universities previous times. I wanted to cover, I had added actually in Navadvipa. So let me just check if I can find this thing about Navadvipa. Meanwhile, if you have questions to ask, you can go ahead now. We can take a few questions. If I find the part on Navadvipa, I'll just cover that Navadvipa part. I was telling you yesterday that Navadvipa is important because while Nalanda, Takshashila and these places kind of declined by the 11th century, 12th century. So, the kind of 11th century to 12th century became the final, so to say, time when these universities were active. So beyond that, many of these centers of learning declined, especially in North India. And between the 12th century and then the British time, you don't find major centers of learning anywhere in North India. which is the reason why Navadvipa is so important, because possibly Navadvipa was one center which continued till almost into the 18th century. So I'm just updating the file. I had uploaded an updated version of this PPT to my drive. I'll just try to download it, and if I can get some material on this Navadvipa part, I'll just cover it for you. So over to you, Nidhi and Pratibhaji. If you have questions, please ask. Just give me a minute.
I think we already have
Yes.
questions in the chat box.
Yes, I request Dr. session. We can go on for 5 to 7 more minutes, Dr. Pratibha. And then I also request you to offer some closing comments. We can first take Manojji's question, and after that we can take Chandra Mohanji's question.
Yeah. So,
can you read out Manojji's question from the chat box, Dr. Pratibha?
yeah, I'm just trying to do that. I'm not able to get the name from where. Okay, you're right. So I hope this is the question which says that what do we know with proof about the educational system before Islamic invasion, and how much deterioration happened during Islamic era? Just like we know things about pre-British. Yeah.
So this is Takshashila and Nalanda are pre-Islamic only, right? And we saw the decline due to Bakhtiyar Khilji during the Islamic period. Both of them are answers to your questions. I hope you're able to connect the dots.
Yeah. So of course it is quite evident. We do know that I mean, historically, I mean, in history, we have read about the destruction of these learning centers and all. So I guess it's there, right, sir? I mean, it's very evident that the destruction
Yes.
that took place about Nalanda and all. In
Correct.
fact, yeah. So I hope we've understood your question, sir. If there is something that you need to add, you may unmute yourself and you may ask the question. There's a hand raised by Ms. Ina Kantiji. If you can unmute and ask your question.
Sir, pranams, sir. Pramod Kumar, sir. I'm audible, sir.
Yes, yes. Namaste.
Sir, pranam, sir, for a wonderful lecture, sir. And just only, I never ask questions, sir. I will learn only, sir, always. I never ask questions, sir, don't think. And then you have said about Nagarjunakonda, sir. Nagarjunakonda is also having some similarities like Nalanda, sir. Because
Right.
I hail from Andhra Pradesh, sir. Nagarjunakonda. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Nagarjunakonda, sir. Actually, that when Nagarjuna Sagar project was planned by Jawaharlal Nehruji, and one famous archaeologist from R. Subramaniam from Andhra Pradesh, and who was a distant relative for me, sir. So in my childhood, I heard about all this, and Ichwaku inscriptions will give excellent data, sir. In this particular Nagarjunakonda, it is called as Sri Vijayapuri Mahavihara. There also, most of the students are from Ceylon, Cambodia, Thailand, Burma, and Indonesia, sir. Very interesting point I want to just mention, sir. That's what actually I have raised my hand, sir. Very interestingly, those people coming from different countries, sir, they requested the wardens that all one country people should be kept in one hostel, sir. That's why Ikshwaku Queens has constructed separate buildings as hostels, and they named them as Simhala Vihara, Suvarna Vihara, Champa Vihara, like that, the ancient name, sir. This is my submission, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, Nidhi, madam.
Thank you.
Yeah, interesting. So I think while I'm reading Mr. Manoj Panda's question over here, I think he's kind of cited that you have given some proofs of Dharampalji's work. So do we have some similar kind of works that they can refer to understand the pre-Islamic kind of era where, the educational system that we're talking about is what we can read?
Okay, so as I said, we don't have such extensive documents of the ancient universities like we have during the British period. Huan Sang's is the most extensive, historical source that we have, where he's describing the entire teaching learning process. But if you walk into any Gurukula even today, if you go to any traditional center of learning today, you can still see the same methodology being followed, the way mathematics is taught, or the way Sanskrit is taught, the way Panini is taught, the way Vedanta is taught in these Gurukulas today. was almost the same teaching learning process that was followed in these ancient universities also, which you find in the epics like Ramayana, Mahabharata, where Rama is going to the Gurukula of Vasishta or Vishwamitra and learning from him, or Krishna is going to the Sandipani Gurukula and learning from him. So you find extensive descriptions in our texts like this. So that is this, the Gurukula system is what is being described there, where you go and do what is called Guru Graha Vasa. So somewhere around the age of 7, your initiation into the studies, formal studies happens. And then you go to the Guru's house, you stay with the Guru and the Guru Patni, or the Guru Mata as she is called, along with the other students. And we do know that even if you are a king, you will have to live in the same austere way as the common people were given. The same quarters were given to, for example, to Rama in Vasishta's Gurukula, to Krishna in Sandipani Gurukula. They will sleep on the floor. They will wear very simple clothes like the Valkala Vastra, as it is called, the clothes made of bark, etc., or the clothes reserved for the brahmacharis, etc. And even whether a prince or a pauper would be treated in the same way in these gurukulas. And they're staying with the guru for a period of at least about 12 to 15 years. The education would be imparted to them. So this is what we have from these traditional texts is what we know of the education system. So as far as the methodologies are concerned, if you want the pedagogies, then there are some texts that I can refer you to, right? How the grammar was taught, how all mathematics was taught, what were the approaches used. So this will be a whole lecture in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, sir. So I don't see more questions. There are more of sharing over here, sir. I think we have a very intelligent and a very well-learned scholarly audience over here. So they have been sharing some good information over here. Yeah, I think we have some more question. Palani ji, there is some question you need to ask, or probably that's okay. So I think
I think there is a comment by Dr. Vanishri. Is that a question or a comment?
They say there was a Lokapa Vana Mata in Vijayanagar, and it's an information. Yeah, according to the panels, here also students from different countries to come for studies and all. Yeah, I think what I understand is that had, as sir, you had shown the map where we had different learning centers, and I think they were the huge universities, but we may also have some, like we call state and regional learning centers also across. So I think, yeah, that's how. So what I understand, sir, that our ancient education system, I think, was rather than funded by some one particular person, it was more societal. Society would kind of come forward and would fund, as you said, that there were, people even who were not literate, or they were farmers. They themselves would give some portion of their earning for the education. And what better can be done? I mean, I was just talking to Dr. Nidhi some time ago saying that it is so important that, we really look into the education systems, currently what we are going through. So I think this is at the right time coming over here. Also, sir, when you talked about that, how the history that we were taught, that we were divided into kingdoms, and then we were always at war with each other. You very beautifully put that, though we may would have had some episodes of instability politically, but I guess our education, our culture, and our economic system kind of brought this unity and kept that Bharatiya thing intact. So that's how we can say that, we were ideally we were unified, right? For example, when you said that the large empires you talked about, Maurya, Gupta, even Mughal for that matter, we were unified in a way. So to say that we were fragmented may be a little not in the correct way to describe our ancient Bharat that way. So, sir, this was something very, very enlightening. As I said, I'm very privileged to be here and to listen to you. I'll be very happy to be a part of this session for next 2 days also. We have a hand raised by Sangeeta ji. If you would want to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yes. One, you have actually shown that there are parallel universities that are running, right? So, I mean, do we have any kind of, mentions or evidence that someone will have choice, right? So whether to join the Nalanda or Vikramashila or, Kanchipuram or wherever, right? I mean, do they have the choice, or it is just the vicinity of, the place that you were staying? So do we have any kind of evidence or mentions?
Yes, we do have. See, Nalanda, Vikramashila, Utantapuri, these three were largely Hindu Buddhist centers of learning. So those who wanted to learn philosophy, in particular Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, Hindu philosophy, they would be drawn to Nalanda and Vikramashila, Udantapuri, etc. And Takshashila, as I was showing, was more known for statecraft, administration, economics, military science. So those who wanted to gain proficiency in these would then go to Takshashila. Vallabhi was known, I think, for sciences, some of the sciences. And then Ujjain, there was a university in Madhya Pradesh in Ujjain, which was known for mathematics, for example. I think one of the ancient Indian mathematicians called Brahmagupta was around this area. He's supposed to have either learned or taught from this Ujjain university. So like these, each of these universities kind of had a breadth of topics that were taught, and they specialized in some of those topics. So there were various factors which were taken into consideration for a student to gain admission there. So his area of interest would be one, and as you said, the distance, right? Those days travel was very difficult, right? So they would choose the nearest center of learning possible for that topic in which they wanted to gain proficiency. So these are some examples. Kandalur Shala was for again Vedic sciences, Vedic studies in Trivandrum. So like these, Nagarjuna again was for Buddhist. There was also, I think, some kind of chemistry that Nagarjuna is known for, certain studies in chemistry that are done. So like these different universities had their own kind of specializations also.
It looks like that, no, mostly it was more of an Buddhist or Jainism,
The cluster in Bihar, around Bihar and Bengal were largely Buddhist centers of learning.
Yes.
Not all.
And the less of the Vedant, let's say, Vedantic studies, maybe that, or is there, we have this.
Vedantic studies were also there, though it may not be much highlighted because these foreign accounts. See, we are gleaning all these details largely from Yuan Sang, who was a Buddhist monk. So he would have had a partiality towards reporting.
Yes.
He would be more favorable in reporting about the Buddhist teachings there.
Yes.
Right? So maybe in future some other sources will come out which will tell us more details of.
Yes. Yeah. There would be definitely, there would be. And this another one was this about the Gurukula. Maybe we can have, if you have anything, I would like to know more about the Gurukula setup. And
There are some books which have come out which kind of talk about the teaching learning process there. I think one of the comments spoke about the Vedangas, which gives you a lot of insight into the approach to these Vedic studies. For example, they had what is called Chandas, Prasodi, they had Shiksha, Phonete.
Yes.
Right? So all these sciences will give us an insight into the way these subjects were taught.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
I'll share some links if you want for this Vedic.
Yes, sir. And the pedagogy probably is, from that perspective, Gurukula, as well as the higher education maybe. So that also will give some of the insights. The particular subject will be taught in a different way. Maybe it could be that, how do they differentiate teaching a mathematics versus a chemistry versus, some other kind of, Rasayan Shastra or anything like that, archery or anything.
Right.
There would be different methodology actually.
Yes.
So, all right. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I just take one little reading of Praveen ji over here, who says that one can look at the Vedangas and the way they are and have been taught over millennia in order to understand how education was imparted in some of the major subjects that made up the Vedangas. Of course, much more needs to be dug out from the layers of history, but the work of reading the manuscript is going on. And yes, I agree with him because a lot of work is happening in terms of translation and all. So I guess one initiative which has been started I think the fruits that we want are all expecting. Probably it will take some more years, but I think the coming generation may benefit out of it. So everything takes time. Nothing happens overnight, sir. So I guess on that note, we may kind of conclude our today's session over here. So thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Pratibha, I think we can close and I
Yeah.
request you to stop the recording. We
Okay.
have two more sessions. Tomorrow we will be focusing on the 1835 Maculay's minute. Right, Pramod sir?
Yes. In tomorrow's session, we will look at Macaulay's 1835 minute in detail, and